Gaming headsets are a scam, ultra-light mice are overhyped, and that 600Hz monitor you want is already outdated. I've spent $6,000 of my own money, no sponsors, finding out what actually matters. I also hit rating in Valorant and Global Elite in CS, and tested a lot of gear so you don't have to. So in this video I will tell you in a no BS manner what you should actually spend your money on if you want to get better at any game. Let's start with the mice, because this is where the marketing is the most deceptive. Brands are constantly pushing 8K polling rates as the next big thing. Unless you have like a top tier CPU and a 540Hz monitor, you won't really feel 8K that much. In fact, for the most of you, 8K polling rate will just lag your game because it eats too much of a CPU power. After like $70 or $80 even, the sensors are almost identical in a real match. You're just paying for numbers you can really use. The real upgrade is geometry and coating. Now I use a fingertip grip, and if I try to use like a Razer V2 Pro, like I don't know, maybe the editor, versus like a Pulsar X2, my aim changes completely because of the width and the hump in the back. One lets my fingers sit lower, giving me more leverage for vertical micro adjustments. The other forces a wider grip. Also, don't ignore the coating. If a mouse is like 30 grams but it's slippery as hell, you'll grip it tighter, which causes hand tension and ruins your aim. If you want like a real upgrade, find the dimensions of the mouse you already like: length, width, hump, height, all that stuff that nobody reads. Those are the only specs that actually matter in my own opinion, especially right now when you will find any mouse with a decent enough sensor on the market. Of course, but even with a perfect mouse, if your surface is inconsistent, your muscle memory is basically useless. Now your mouse pad is literally 50% of your aim. Now you need to pick a surface for your own style. Speed pads if you're like a low sense player, or control pads for high sense wrist players. But the final boss, at least for me, is the glass pad. Now why I actually prefer a glass pad is because it never wears out and feels the same every day regardless of the weather. And for me that's a big enough of a factor. However, being brutally honest, glass pads come with a tax. You'll need a compression sleeve so your arm doesn't stick to the glass. And you'll go through mouse skates every week because glass will eat your skates for breakfast. Now if you aren't ready for that maintenance, stick to a high quality hybrid pad like the Artisan or Saturn Pro. If your aim feels off and you haven't changed anything, don't buy a new mouse. It might be just the pad that is actually dead. But even with a perfect glide, you're still going to be slow if your keyboard has that 2015 era latency. Now keyboards are a massive scam right now because of the custom trend. People will spend like $500 on some heavy aluminum boards just for the sounds. For gaming, that weight is a handicap in my opinion. Now in my past I've deadlifted like 250 kg and I still prefer a light plastic board because I need to shift it mid-fight to make room for my mouse. If I have to actually struggle to move my keyboard, that is not really the point of it. Now in my opinion, for keyboards there are only three things that matter: Hall effect switches, latency, and SOCD. If you don't have the Hall effect with a rapid trigger, you are at a disadvantage at the moment. But please don't buy any cheap Hall effect board from a random brand. If the firmware is bad, you'll get high input lag. So stick to Wooting or Razer, they have the lowest latency and the best implementation of these features. But no matter how fast your keyboard is, it won't really matter if your monitor is showing you outdated information. Now this is where companies really think that you're dumb. They will still sell you like 600Hz TN panels for thousands of dollars. And a lot of people will still chase those big hertz numbers for absolutely no reason. TN panels have terrible colors and zero contrast, which actually makes it harder to spot enemies in dark corners. In 2025, OLED is the only jump worth making. In my opinion, a 480Hz OLED is smoother than a 600Hz TN panel because of pixel response time. OLED pixels turn off instantly. On a TN, the pixels take time to change colors, which creates that ghosting or blur effect. On OLED is like looking at a moving photograph with zero blur. Now just make sure your PC can actually hit the frames, because most of you are bottlenecked without even knowing it. If you have like a 500Hz monitor but your game is running at like 120 FPS, you just wasted your money. In the most popular competitive shooters, your CPU and RAM frequency are way more important than your GPU. You could have like the latest RTX model, but if your RAM is slow, your game will still feel choppy. Now, the silent killer is your 1% lows. That's the FPS drop you get when 3 smokes on 2 ultimates go off at once. And this is usually created by RAM struggling to feed the CPU. But here is the no BS value you need to hear. Check your BIOS first. Half of you bought fast RAM but never enable XMP or Expo in your BIOS. You might just have like some crazy RAM but you're not running them at full capacity, so please check that first. Fix the source of the frame before you buy any fancy display. And while we're fixing the experience, let's also talk about the biggest scam in history of gaming: audio. Now, gaming headsets are the biggest lie in the industry by far. You're paying for a logo, for some RGB colors, and fake 7.1 surround. For the same price as a high-end headset, get a pair of Sennheiser, open backs, or quality IMs. These are built for imaging and soundstage. Open back headphones give you a wider stage, so you can tell if an enemy is 5 meters away or 20 meters away. For me, when I switched to real audio, in this case IMs, it was like a fog was lifted. You will hear the exact floor, the exact corner, and the direction with total precision. So please stop paying for the gaming label and start paying for actual drivers. Now, if you want to stop wasting money, just follow this order. Fix your PC first, get a good CPU, and make sure your DDR5 is actually running at the right speed in your BIOS. Then look at an OLED monitor for that motion clarity. After that, find a mouse shape that fits your hand dimensions, get a Hall effect keyboard, and ditch the headset for some real headphones. That's the no BS way to actually improve your setup and your rank. Of course, none of this will apply if you don't really play the game. If you spend a lot of money on a bunch of gear, but you never actually want to improve in the game, it doesn't really matter. Now, if this video helped you and saved you some cash, hit the subscribe button, and I'm going to see you in the next one.